Is it fair to say that in the media coverage over the suggestions, the demands related to the election that will occur in less than 60 days' time, there's been a lack of accuracy in terms of what people are talking about? Is that a good place to start in terms of the challenge?
Yeah, it is. In particular, this constant push by the media that mail-in voting is just wonderful, and there is just absolutely no risk whatsoever of fraud or any other kind of
No record, never happened before. No such thing as election fraud.
Right.
All right. So let's start with the taxonomy, because I think in the majority of cases, sometimes, maybe the majority of those cases, willfully, there is a conflation of absentee voting. I've done absentee voting in the past, and mail-in voting. So let's start with the 101. Let's have a tabula rasa. These are not the same things, are they, Hans?
No, they're not. Five states in the U.S., including Washington and Oregon, have made what I consider to be the unwise decision to have all mail elections. So you don't vote in person. And what happens?
So no polling stations.
No polling stations. What happens each election is election officials mail a ballot to every registered voter. Now, the problem with that is that voter registration rolls are in terrible condition all over the country. States don't do a very good job of cleaning up the rolls.
Dead people, wrong addresses, people who've moved away, people who aren't registered, who are registered.
Yes, and so when you mail a ballot to folks like that, that arrive at people's homes where that particular voter doesn't live anymore, it gives the potential for those ballots to be collected and sent in,
Meaning to be fraudulently filled out.
Exactly right. I'll give you a quick example of that, if I may.
Yeah.
I actually have a colleague at the Heritage Foundation. She grew up in Washington State. She moved away from the state 8 years ago. She's no longer
Not yesterday, 8 years ago.
Her sister moved away 10 years ago, yet every single election, her parents tell her that ballots arrive in the mail addressed to her and her sister. They could easily vote those ballots, mail them in. They would be counted. The state of Washington would not know there's a problem because
they're on the rolls.
They're on the rolls. They think they're still a resident of the state. Similarly, the whole problem with mail-in ballots is there's almost no authentication. Yeah, they're supposed to do a signature comparison, but it's very easy to get around that. They don't have much time to process millions of ballots. So that's extremely superficial and could easily be gotten around. Again, to just give you a quick example, in Oregon, which has all-mail elections, some years ago, a professor at one of the universities did a survey in just one county. 5% of the people they surveyed admitted that somebody else had filled out their ballot. 2.5% admitted that somebody else had signed their ballot. Now, that may sound like a small percentage, but if that was true in every county in the state, that's tens of thousands of ballots.
Right.
And the professor who did the survey said she actually thinks it's probably more because people don't like to admit that they did something illegal.
Well, and what were the margins in Florida in 2000?
Yeah, couple of hundred.
Couple of hundred.
Right. Now, that's different from the rest of the country. 45 states, District of Columbia, people vote in person, but you can vote by absentee ballot. In many of those states, you don't need an excuse. In about a dozen states, still, you need an excuse, such as you're too sick, you're physically disabled.
Or work doesn't permit you.
Exactly. And what you do there, though, is you have to fill out a form, provide some of the same information you provided when you registered, sign it, and send it in, and then the election officials will send you the ballot. It's not a perfect system, but at least there's some ability, again, to try to authenticate that you're a real voter and you're the person who has requested.
Well, also, you're not relying upon a faulty electoral roll.
Exactly.
And a voter has said, hey, I want to vote and I can't. Yes. And they make the conscious decision to request that mail-in ballot.
That's right.
Now, how about this shocking concept that I hadn't even thought of? This is so rife for potential abuse before we even get to things like ballot harvesting. But what the president intimated last week, what is to stop somebody who has voted early in receipt of one of these automatically generated mail-in ballots and sent in their vote for a candidate, say Joe Biden, and then on election day, in a state that still has polling stations, decides to go in and vote again for that candidate, doubling the vote. What are the defenses against that?
Well, the only defense is if election officials are good at their job. In other words, when an absentee ballot comes back, it's mailed back, do they check that person's name off the voter registration list so that on election day, when officials check and the person comes in the poll, they'll be able to know that the person already voted, and that just depends on how good they are. And if the absentee ballot comes in very close to election day, when they're scrambling to try to get the voter list out to all the precincts, they might not be able to get that information in time to prevent that from happening. But look, what I'm more concerned about with absentee ballots is those are the ballots that are the easiest ballots to steal, forge, alter, and otherwise use to try to steal an election.
Now, we're not talking about highly sophisticated human artifacts, are we? This isn't a $100 bill that is very difficult to forge.
No, not at all. And in fact, there are two ways this can easily be done that have been demonstrated actually by a recent case and by actually a recent story in the New York Post by a guy who admitted he'd been doing it for years.
Yes, this just broke.
Right. In North Carolina 2 years ago, a congressional race was overturned. 7 people have been criminally charged. The vote harvester in that case, the political consultant who was doing this, look, they would go to people's homes and say, hey, fill out an absentee ballot request form. We'll deliver it for you. He would take that form back to his office and photocopy it before sending it to election officials. Then when the absentee ballots arrived at people's homes, they would go back there to collect the ballots.
To pick it up.
Sometimes if they didn't like the vote, they would alter the vote, or sometimes they would just pick up the ballots before the voter had even signed it. And because they had a photocopy, the voter signature, they could easily forge it. They altered enough ballots to alter the outcome of the election. And in the case in the New York Post, this guy who's been doing this for years said, look, they collect the absentee ballots from the voters that have already put in envelopes, and they simply steam open the envelope. They have already photocopied blank ballots. They refill it out. They then can sign it because they've got the signature of the ballot, reseal the envelope, send it in. And this guy admitted they've done this in multiple elections and have stolen thousands of votes doing it.
But Hans, we are told repeatedly, nay, every day, by the legacy media, by the establishment press, that election fraud is non-existent. It is a non-issue.
Yeah, but that's actually, it's kind of weird, Sebastian. That's a recent occurrence. The press actually used to cover this kind of thing, and it's only in the last 10 years that the progressive left, in order to oppose election reforms like voter ID, started pushing this narrative myth that there's no voter fraud in the U.S., and therefore there's no reason for any of these. And the media just kind of picked this up and has run with it, ignoring the actual facts.
Incredible. He is the manager for the Election Law Reform Initiative and senior legal fellow at the center of the conservative movement at the Heritage Organization, the Heritage Foundation.